Hi everyone, coming to you live from Halloween here, and we're going to take a little turn through the scientific revolution, just look at some major accomplishments and things like that. You don't need the history of Halloween, I'm assuming. Scientific revolution. So the main points, the main ideas of this, it is an inquiry-based time period. This is not a time period of being anti-religious. It's not a time period of trying to reform. We'll get to that later into the Enlightenment. This is kind of a stepping stone to take us there. And one of the major themes of this course and the way this course is set up is the way that knowledge is obtained. Who is giving the knowledge? How are you getting that knowledge? And before this time period, you're looking at the churches being the main purveyors of information. But as we move into the scientific revolution, it's really more based around experience, learning through experimentation, learning through evidence. And so it's not that a particular group is in charge of information, it's discovering new information through those methods. We see the use of reason here, but especially based on observations and evidence, and then combining that with logic. And that's something that's a little bit different from previous time periods. It is known as the natural philosophy. So when you hear those terms being used, they're talking about science during this time period. Science fell under the purview of philosophy in general. We have this word here, empiricism, and the dictionary definition is knowledge through sensory experience. But what it really means in this case is discovery through sensory experience, learning how to experiment, learning how to derive knowledge from experiences and experiments that are there. We have the difference, we're differentiating between inductive and deductive reasoning. The king of deductive reasoning is Aristotle. Aristotle creates these methods of learning called syllogisms. It's based around what at the time would be a known fact and combining those known facts together. You want to think about the transition property in this case. An example might be all teachers are smart. Then your second piece of information is Mr. Slim is a teacher. And so then the inference that you're kind of able to draw out of this is Mr. Slim is smart, which obviously you can tell by my attire today may or may not be the case. The problem with these is they are predicated on unobservable facts, things that are deemed to be known but may not be true. And so these inductive thinkers during this time period, it's learning through that experience. It's not learning based on previously held assumptions. And when we get into Descartes, that's really what his whole spiel is. Descartes also says, and I'm paraphrasing here, everyone should entertain doubt. The idea that you should not go in having a specific answer at the ready. You're not trying to prove a specific answer. You're, if anything, trying to doubt a previously held assumption and seeing how your experiments, seeing how your logic takes you through that process. This time period is really a challenge to the ancient sciences. Even 100 years prior to this time period, you're talking about the Renaissance. These are those Renaissance thinkers that hold the classics such as Greeks and Roman sciences in such incredible high esteem. And that's really going to ruffle some feathers during this time period because these are heavy hitters. You're going against Aristotle, you're going against Ptolemy in some cases. And that's absolutely going to rub some people the wrong way, and especially people who had that mentality and held those things so dearly for such a long time period. Um, we're seeing here in this inductive reasoning the evidence to instruct knowledge, using that evidence to guide the way that knowledge is presented. This is really going to challenge the worldview of people. And we have a tendency to kind of be cynical regarding the churches during this time period, but it's not just the churches, it's everyday people as well who are going to have their worldviews challenged. That includes humanism during that time period, and really this is where we see Europe surpassing the knowledge that had been set up before. Europe is going beyond just simply building off of the knowledge of the classics. And we're going to take a look at some of these guys here today. The scientific revolution really starts in 1538, 1539 with Nicholas Copernicus. And Copernicus is going to deliver the heliocentric model. This is something that had been kicked around for a while. It's not something that's brand new, but he's the first to kind of put it to paper. And knowing that this is going to cause such a stir, he actually waits until he's on his deathbed, basically, to tell his friend to go ahead and publish it. There's actually some discrepancy whether he even wanted it published or not, or the friend just went ahead and did it anyway to disseminate that information. All of this is really predicated on the events of 90 years prior, the invention of the printing press by Johann Gutenberg. And so we're moving into a time period where we're seeing more and more of those effects of the access to knowledge and access of information, not just in Italy, where the printing presses initially felt, but all across Europe and especially into Northern Europe during this time period here. The second guy we want to keep an eye on is, oh, sorry guys, sorry about that interruption, everyone. Um, as I was saying, Johannes Kepler is our next guy, and Kepler is going to focus on the laws of planetary motion, the fact that planets do not orbit in a completely circular, perfect pattern set out by the ways of God, but instead are on an elliptical pattern, and that these patterns can be measured. These paths can be measured, and it's based on mathematical principles. He proves his theories using math. And so, again, we're getting closer to that inductive idea of gaining knowledge through observable evidence. And so he's able to prove it mathematically, and then it's Galileo who then takes the next step. Um, he so he's around during Copernicus's time at least a little bit, and again, the heliocentric theory is not simply Copernicus's deal. And so Galileo is a part of this as well. And Galileo basically has a war of words over the course of 3 different pamphlets with the head scientist, the head astronomer of the Catholic Church during this time period. And they go back and forth. I'm not going to say that it's like Twitter trolling, but it's kind of on that level. And as a result, in 1615, he's brought before the Inquisition. He's basically told, recant what you said about the heliocentric theory. And Galileo at first is like, no, I'm right. And they say, recant. And he says, all right, fine, whatever. He's basically placed under house arrest, and he'll go back to recanting his recantation eventually. But the reason he's able to do this is because of the telescope. And the telescope is proof of this happening. He is able to see the moons of Jupiter orbiting Jupiter, and then that gives us the knowledge that not everything has to revolve around the Earth. And from there, you can extrapolate how then it's pretty simple to make the leap that the heliocentric model is the one that we're using. There are some remnants of the geocentric model being used when you say things like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The Earth is not the focal point. The sun doesn't do that. It's the Earth that rotates that gives us those things. But we still use some of those ideas, which is kind of interesting. At any rate, the technology has allowed this inductive reasoning to take place. He is not the first person who makes a telescope by any means, but his telescope is the most powerful and allows him to see these different bodies. He's able to see the craters on the moon and be able to describe them and look at how similar they are to the craters on the Earth, and the realization that both of these things can be created from the same matter. Maybe. The next group in the scientific revolution that we're talking about here is Sir Francis Bacon. And Sir Francis Bacon is concerned with the scientific method. He's generally looked at as the father of the scientific method. Again, research the problem, state a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, make your conclusion as you look at the data, and then come up with a new hypothesis. All of this is coming out of, not perfectly so, but out of Francis Bacon and Rene Descartes. Combining those two ideas together, we kind of get close to the modern scientific method that you guys have to use in things like science class, labs, and whatnot. Francis Bacon during this time period is experimenting with a bunch of different things, and that's how he ends up dying. He's playing around with ice and snow and a rabbit, and he contracts pneumonia and dies. I don't mean to laugh at that. It's just kind of proof of the level to which these scientists are willing to go in order to create scientific inquiry. Rene Descartes, he's the I think therefore I am guy, cogito ergo sum. My Latin is terrible, sorry. And combined his ideas together to form the scientific method. But Descartes, he's the one who strips everything down and says, all right, maybe I can't trust my senses. How do I know that any of this is real? And eventually gets to the point that the fact that he is even considering whether he is in fact real or not is proof of him being real on some plane of existence and not just being a part of the matrix or whatever. And Descartes, he gets his hands in a lot of different things, and science, overall philosophy, but it's Descartes that really kind of pushes this out, 1637. So we're moving on through, we're about 100 years from Copernicus at this point, and we're seeing the development of the quote unquote natural philosophy, the idea of science through discovery, stripping things away, looking at observation as a way to gain evidence. And then Isaac Newton is kind of the father of physics. He creates, it's a much longer title. It's Principia, the universal laws of planetary gravitation in 1687, and that's sometimes considered to be kind of the end of the scientific revolution with Newton. And he is able to prove that there isn't a separate law for gravity on Earth and a separate law for planetary gravity. Um, it's just the mass of an object and the distance of an object that has created that. And he's the apple guy. The apple falls, and wow, it's gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. It's a constant, and so you just need to figure out mass and distance in order to determine gravitational pull of planetary bodies. In doing so and in figuring this out, he invents calculus. So you can thank him for all of your troubles moving forward in your school careers. But he's the calc guy, and he does this in addition to everything else he's doing in terms of physics and science. The last two people to discuss here are Andreas Vesalius, and he is concerned with anatomy. He's the guy in the top right there, Mr. Steal Your Corpse. It is really taboo. This is, again, Copernicus's time period right at the end there. It's really taboo to deal with anatomy in any way, shape, or form. Da Vinci is noted for cutting into bodies and paying people for bodies too, and seeing how they move and how they work. But it's not really something that's acceptable. So he actually helps out digging a grave, knowing full well that he's going to dig up that grave again in order to get the body to be able to examine the body. And then these two guys are kind of medically based. That's why I separated them as opposed to putting them chronologically. William Harvey, the circulation of blood, how blood moves through the body. He also is able to prove the four chambers of the heart. That's all thanks to him as well. And so we're seeing the elements of learning through experiences, cutting open a body, dissecting things. You guys get kind of squeamish dealing with animals. Imagine dealing with a human body and you're one of the few people who's doing it. So all of this is going into that common theme of how these people view knowledge, how knowledge is gained. Is it gained through instruction or is it gained through observation and evidence? And we'll see the impact that the scientific revolution is going to have on Enlightenment thinkers and Europe as a whole in the next part of this mini lecture coming up later on this week. I hope you guys have a great day. Have a happy Halloween. Don't eat too much candy, and I will see you later.